In 1200 BC, inside the wealthy port city of Ugarit, a scribe sat down, picked up a stylus, and began urgently pressing a message into a piece of wet clay. It was a desperate plea for military aid to a neighboring king. To survive the long journey, the tablet needed to be hardened, so the scribe placed it into a kiln to bake. The letter never left the oven. Before the clay could fully cure, invaders breached the city walls, and Ugarit burned. That unfinished plea for help sat buried in the ash for 3,000 years, a physical artifact frozen at the exact second a civilization died. The disaster at Ugarit was a localized symptom of a much larger breakdown. That scribe's panic marks the point where a vast, deeply connected global system began to come apart at the seams. Across the Aegean Sea, the Mycenaean Greeks met a similar fate. Their stone palaces collapsed, and their written language, Linear B, vanished. Later Greeks had to invent a new alphabet centuries later because the memory of how to read and write had been lost. Further east, the Hittite Empire, a superpower that had stood for 5 centuries and fought Egypt to a standstill, simply evaporated. Their capital, Hattusa, was torched and abandoned, leaving no successor state behind. Across the eastern Mediterranean, long-distance trade halted. The populations of previously thriving regions plummeted by as much as 80% within a few decades. In a single human generation, the most prominent civilizations of the age collapsed simultaneously. It is tempting to look back at the Late Bronze Age as a primitive, disconnected time. The archaeological reality is the opposite. They built a thriving, globalized economy that spanned the Mediterranean. Rulers in Mycenae, Hattusa, and Egypt addressed each other as brothers in their diplomatic letters, organizing the massive exchange of grain, textiles, and vital resources. Above all else, they needed copper and tin. These two elements had to be mined in different corners of the known world, shipped across the sea, and combined to forge bronze, the metal that equipped their armies and built their tools. The kings and pharaohs who ruled these callous economies derived their legitimacy from this trade. Their ability to import foreign luxury goods and basic metals provided physical proof of their power. This extreme interdependence allowed them to build sprawling, magnificent societies. It also meant that a disruption in one region would immediately starve the others. For decades, historians blamed the collapse on a mysterious group of raiders known as the Sea Peoples, who swept down the coastlines, burning cities to the ground. But archaeological consensus has shifted. These maritime attackers were likely desperate refugees, displaced from their own homes by a wider crisis, and driven to the sea by famine. Ancient pollen records and sediment cores reveal that beginning around 1200 BC, a severe, prolonged drought settled over the eastern Mediterranean. Rivers ran dry and agricultural yields plummeted. This rapid climate shift triggered widespread famine, forcing entire populations to abandon their lands. At the same time, deep fault lines ruptured. Physical evidence from the ruins indicates a phenomenon called an earthquake storm, violently shaking key cities to pieces over a span of 50 years. Inside the surviving cities, starving lower classes turned on their rulers. The rigid palace economies required constant tribute, but could no longer feed their own citizens, sparking violent internal uprisings. Drought struck the land. Earthquakes shattered the cities. Foreign invaders swept through, and civil war erupted. Any single crisis would have caused severe damage, but the fatal blow was the convergence of all 4 striking at once. The Bronze Age suffered a complex systems failure. When a highly integrated network encounters simultaneous shocks, it loses the ability to absorb damage. The failure cascaded. Drought destroyed harvests, citizens rebelled, and with ports burning, the maritime trade routes snapped. Without those supply lines, the major palaces were cut off from the copper and tin required to manufacture weapons and armor. Without an endless supply of bronze to equip their soldiers, the ruling class lost their monopoly on violence. They could no longer put down internal riots or repel the starving refugees attacking their walls. The Bronze Age system lacked the flexibility to adapt. Because of its rigid, hyper-connected complexity, the failure progressed with catastrophic speed once the network began to break. The aftermath was a profound silence. For centuries, the Mediterranean fell into a dark age. Thriving cosmopolitan hubs lay abandoned in the dirt, and sophisticated knowledge was completely unlearned. These ancient people were as intelligent and capable as any modern population. They were the architects of an economic machine that reached its limit during a period of intense global chaos. Today, we rely on global supply chains far more interconnected than ancient kings conceived, operating under an assumption of permanent stability and uninterrupted global cooperation. The ruins of Ugarit and Hattusa offer a stark historical lesson. High levels of complexity create specific vulnerabilities, especially when a system faces simultaneous pressures across its entire network. History proves an advanced, interconnected world can vanish in a generation, leaving us to wonder if we're ignoring the terminal cracks in our own system.